Housing prices are constantly rising. But what happens when you can't afford to pay your rent on time? In many cities today, rising real estate prices quietly reshape everyday life, turning simple dreams into careful calculations. Owning a home feels farther away for countless families, and renting, while flexible on paper, often brings its own set of emotional and financial pressures. This story begins in that familiar space, where ordinary people try to stay steady while the ground beneath them seems to shift. Yu and her husband Yoshida are not unusual in any dramatic sense. They represent the kind of couple you might pass on the street without a second thought. They work hard, plan carefully, and value stability. Like many families, they once believed that effort and responsibility would naturally lead to comfort over time. Yet as rental prices continued to climb, even their well-organized routine began to feel tight. Bills arrived on schedule, but income did not always stretch as far as expected. The challenge was not sudden or catastrophic. It was gradual, subtle, and therefore more psychologically demanding. What makes moments like these especially difficult is not just the numbers on paper, but the quiet internal dialogue they create. You found herself thinking less about luxury or long-term goals, and more about balance, how to keep life calm, predictable, and dignified. Yoshida shared these thoughts, often without words. They understood that pressure, when left unaddressed, tends to grow. Still, they also knew that reacting impulsively or emotionally rarely leads to lasting solutions. In many similar situations, people choose avoidance. They delay conversations, hoping circumstances will improve on their own. Yu, however, felt that silence would only deepen uncertainty. She believed that responsibility did not end with paying bills. It also included honest communication. This belief did not come from idealism, but from experience. You understood that trust, once established, could create space for understanding, even in uncomfortable discussions. The decision she made was simple in concept, yet emotionally demanding. Instead of waiting, you arranged a direct meeting with the landlord. There was no dramatic confrontation, no attempt to shift blame or seek pity. Her approach was calm and respectful. She explained her family's situation clearly, acknowledging their obligations while also expressing the temporary nature of their difficulty. The tone mattered as much as the words. You spoke with sincerity, not expectation, allowing the truth to stand on its own. This moment highlights an important psychological principle often overlooked in daily life. When people communicate openly, they reduce uncertainty not only for others, but for themselves. Yu was not guaranteed a favorable response, but she gained something equally valuable: clarity. By choosing honesty, she replaced anxiety with agency. She was no longer reacting to pressure. She was engaging with it thoughtfully. At home, Yu and Yoshida continued the same approach with each other. They reviewed their expenses, discussed priorities, and adjusted habits without resentment. These conversations were not about sacrifice in a negative sense, but about alignment. They reminded themselves that financial challenges are not moral failures. They are signals encouraging reassessment and cooperation. Through planning and mutual respect, they reinforced their partnership rather than allowing stress to divide it. In Yu's story, the first step toward balance was not a financial windfall, but a thoughtful conversation, grounded in trust and self-respect. Once you had spoken openly, something subtle but important shifted inside her. The pressure did not disappear, yet it became more manageable, as if naming the challenge had reduced its weight. Instead of focusing on what they lacked, they examined how they used what they already had. Small expenses that once felt invisible were now discussed calmly, without blame. Yoshida approached these discussions with patience. He believed that teamwork mattered more than perfect solutions. Rather than framing the situation as a setback, he treated it as a learning period. Financial pressure often triggers fear, but when shared openly, it can strengthen cooperation. Their conversations became less about numbers and more about values, security, trust, and mutual support. Meanwhile, you reflected on how quickly financial stress can influence self-worth. It is easy to equate stability with success and struggle with failure. She resisted this narrative. You reminded herself that circumstances change, but character remains. By choosing responsibility over avoidance, she reaffirmed her sense of dignity. As days passed, practical improvements began to appear. Careful planning reduced uncertainty, and predictable routines restored confidence. This positive cycle did not eliminate challenges, but it transformed how those challenges were experienced. Renting, once seen as a compromise, became a lesson in adaptability for Yu and Yoshida. They learned that true stability comes not from ownership, but from staying aligned and flexible. Through open communication and thoughtful choices, they shared stress rather than carrying it alone. Their journey shows that steady progress, guided by intention and cooperation, can turn pressure into purpose and build lasting stability. Over time, the atmosphere in Yu and Yoshida's life began to feel steadier, not because circumstances had magically improved, but because their approach had matured. Challenges still appeared, yet they no longer dominated every thought. Instead, each difficulty was treated as a signal something to be understood and addressed, rather than feared. The landlord's calm response reinforced a quiet truth. Honesty builds trust, and trust opens space for understanding. For Yu, integrity proved not only ethical, but practical. At the same time, Yoshida reframed renting as a strategic phase rather than a limitation, helping them stay hopeful without anxiety. Their journey shows that resilience grows through consistent choices and shared responsibility. By meeting uncertainty with patience and respect, they transformed pressure into learning and built stability one deliberate decision at a time.